ET now brings you the mega pre-budget special coverage as the government prepares to present its last budget before the Lok Sabha elections. Will the lack of jobs cost the Modi government very dearly? And will populism prevail over fiscal prudence this time around? A special discussion that's coming up right here on the India Development Debate this evening. It's a great evening to be joining you right here on this budget special of the India Development Debate. I'm Supriya Shrinate. Now, jobs, or maybe the lack of it, will be one of the key themes in election 2019. While the Modi government is fighting the criticism that it has failed in quality employment generation, economists acknowledge that the situation is indeed worrying. The fact remains that there is little that the government can do to change the sentiment with elections round the corner. With the job pie shrinking, the election gimmick of 10% reservation for the economic weaker section is not cutting much ice either. Some surveys suggest that the number of government jobs has shrunk by 75,000 since 2014, when the Modi government did take office. Putting the Modi government in a bind, the Congress has fired the first salvo, promising a minimum income guarantee for the poor if it is indeed voted to power this year. Now, in fact, it is a typical catch-22 situation for Team Modi. A fiscally prudent budget may be a political suicide. On the contrary, a goodies-packed budget will have its own fiscal implications, especially when it is seeking a second term in office. We talk about the jobs conundrum right here on the India Development Debate this evening, and I couldn't have asked for a better panel than the one I have right now. S.K. Munjal, Chairman, Hero Enterprise; Naushad Forbes, Co-Chairman, Forbes Marshall; Pradeep Bhargav, Director, Persistent Systems and President, Maratha Chamber of Commerce in Pune; and of course Manish Sabharwal, Chairman and Co-Founder, Team Lee. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for sparing time and joining us on the show this evening. This is the big budget coverage, and we're beginning with the very crucial issue of jobs. And Manish, you're the man who has a lot of exposure to that sector. In some sense, you're in the manpower consulting business. I will quickly ask you a question and then move on to the the more emphatic parts of this debate. Jobs has been an Achilles heel, not just for this government, but previous governments as well. Particularly for this, because Prime Minister Modi rode to power promising creation of 2 crore jobs a year. If you look around, his government is being criticized on all quarters for lack of job creation. As somebody who heads a manpower consulting firm, do you think the situation has significantly worsened in the last 4.5 years?
Well, I don't think India's official unemployment rate is a fudge, right? I think you have to make up your mind. Our official unemployment rate since independence has between 3 and 6%. So we don't have, our labor market doesn't have a jobs problem, we have a poverty problem. So no, I don't think that things have gotten worse. In fact, I think there are 2 very important numbers, 30 million new Provident Fund and ESI payers and 6 million new registered enterprises. Now, this is a new formalization. I'm not claiming that they are new jobs, but they are new formal jobs. And since India doesn't have a jobs problem and we have a wages problem, I think we are making progress on formalization, and formalization is the only way to raise wages.
Okay, let me take this. Okay, I'm going to talk about formalization in just a minute from now. But, I think the entire jobs data gets somehow mired in the jobs data debate. And Mr. Munjal, according to the CMIE, the data that does suggest that India lost about 11 million jobs from December 2017 to December 2018. Skill India, Make in India don't seem to have borne the results that they were intended to. 26.3 lakh certified under Skill India, 10 lakh have been placed. Is the lack of jobs a serious issue, and is this an issue beyond the debate on jobs data? Because somehow this entire debate gets mired in, is the data right, is the data fudged, whose data is it versus, who else is? But is this a serious issue right now facing our country and our economy?
So it's certainly a very active debate that's going on about jobs. I think when the economy continues to grow at above 6 and 7% in any nation, it cannot be completely jobless growth. It doesn't happen, especially in an economy like ours, which has so many jobs which are done by hand. And it's only the top end of the industry which is highly automated or using robotics, which is a very, very thin slice of the employment. For most of the employment that we have in this country, there are jobs done by people, done by hand. So I am actually reasonably confident that the jobs are actually growing. And I'm saying confident because, as you said earlier, there is a lot of confusion about jobs from the numbers that we have coming out from different data sources. I do think, however, we do need to produce more. The other thing, I completely agree with Manish, by the way, that the issue is also about what wages are paid. There are lots of jobs around, people who work in the formal sector, and the large bulk of the number of Indians who work in the informal sector or for themselves. That number is very, very large, and I don't think we have any clue of what that accurate number is. It is, however, important for us to realize that for us to grow jobs, the existing industry does not grow jobs. In fact, existing industry's role is always to become more efficient, more productive, and thereby actually ends up losing jobs in some cases, if not remaining steady. You need small industries to grow to medium size, medium to grow to large, and new enterprises to continue to get established. Therefore, the focus on startups, etc., is very, very critical for the formal sector jobs to get created. We have to have more enterprises. And I think that's where the big focus needs to be. And I do think we are creating more jobs, but I'm just not sure how many we are creating.
Okay, fair point indeed. We need more enterprises and we're not sure how many jobs are we creating. Yes, irrespective of all of that, we need more jobs. Naushad, Forbes, coming to you. I will just speak about the budget. Let's just move to the elephant in the room, and that's the union budget. Can anything in the budget really move the needle as far as the job crisis in India is concerned?
So maybe a single budget can't transform the jobs crisis, but maybe several budgets built on over time can. I think we should come back to the longer term perspective, and then the budget should also address those longer term issues. I'd say it's not just a jobs. If you say, how do you create jobs? The government in itself is not going to create jobs. It employs a small number of people, and it will, over time, in fact, job growth in the government should actually be relatively small. Jobs will get created because of broader economic growth, and it will get created because of skills and education that enable people to go out and get employed in productive jobs. And it is in skills and in education where we are failing our population. And this is a failure of the current government, and it is a failure of the previous government. It is quite cross-party. We need to address the skills crisis. We have today in our country less than 5% of our population is formally skilled. That compares with proportions that are above 90% in places like South Korea, above 80% in places like Japan. We need to achieve those same kinds of skilling levels. To achieve those skilling levels, we need basic education that's provided. As many of you would know, every year the NGO Pratham publishes a state of education in the country. It came out, the report for 2018 came out a week ago, and it makes for sobering reading. It says that only half of the children in class 5 can read a text at the class 2 level. And it says that only 20% of children in class 3 can do division, simple division. That's what's failing our population more than anything else. And if we can actually address and focus on primary education, focus on outcomes in education, and then focus on skilling programs that can give people employment opportunities because of their skilling, I think we can go a very long way in the medium term to addressing the jobs problem. It's not that jobs are not there. There are in the country over 1 million vacancies for teachers alone. There are, if you go to the other end of the spectrum,
right,
there are over 1,000 vacancies for professors
yes,
in the IITs alone. So we have vacancies, we have a problem with skills and education.
Right. No, Dr. Forbes, I agree with you, but give me a minute and I will come back to both you and Mr. Munjal, because you're really the job creators in some sense. But Mr. Bhargav, let's pull you into this discussion as well. The 10% jobs quota that is being offered as a SOP before the elections, or the minimum income guarantee that's being offered from the other end of the political spectrum before elections, is that in some sense an acceptance on the part of our political class that job creation is not going to be easy, it's not going to be a cakewalk, and which is why we are resorting to SOPs like these?
Well, if you were to look at it, what is being articulated is a political statement, and I don't want to opine on this. First of all, government is never going to be a big job employer, and we know it, and thank God they shouldn't be. So when they're putting quotas into government jobs, it's a very minuscule portion of the country that they're addressing. And if you get into philosophically, what do jobs give? They give income. So the rational criteria for those who you want to give jobs should be the ones who have been denied income. To that extent, what has come out recently, and I'm not passing judgment on the previous decision, makes rational thinking that those who are economically deprived should be given the priority. But really speaking, government jobs are going to be so small, and they should stay at very small level. And I just want to, if your permission, I want to say this business of jobs, which we're talking about, there is job and there is gainful engagement, there is a livelihood. Naukri or rozgar mein farak hai. What we have been beating about is the number of jobs. And actually speaking, number of jobs will, and as Sunil also mentioned, may come down. But the gainful engagement, livelihood, rozgar of people is increasing. And this is something we can't measure. But that's precisely what is happening. Technology is driving it. Our competitiveness is driving it. A whole lot of us are getting into a situation where people work from home, people do their solo. And in fact, that's what we should increase. Formal payroll jobs are not going to be there because the industry is wary about taking a long-term commitment. And I think we should be happy about the fact that with GDP growing, obviously GDP can't grow if there is no value add of labor. So clearly jobs and livelihood is happening in this country. We shouldn't beat ourselves too much about the jobless growth. There is a engagement which is increasing, in my opinion. And quotas are a way of life.
Okay. I think, Mr. Bhargav, give me a minute. I want to talk about some of the issues. And Mr. Munjal, job creation, like you were referring to earlier, is dependent on the organized sector, but the obstacles to the expansion of the organized sector are very long. And I can speak on this ad nauseum, over-leveraged banks. We've still got the labor legislation issues. We've got the land acquisition issues. We've got the not have the infrastructure. Is the best way to create jobs, to focus on these areas? And how easy is it going to be for the budget? Because some of the issues that we speak about, whether it's labor and land, which could possibly move the needle big time on jobs, is not even perhaps going to be mentioned in the budget. This is going to be political will now left to the states. And so one wonders what's happening on that front.
So Supriya, I think it's incorrect to focus and connect the budget statement that's going to come now to jobs. This is supposedly a vote on account. With an election around the corner just a few months away, this ought to be logically and ideally only a statement of account. However, it has been seen that before an election, every government, well, most governments do end up using this as an occasion to make some announcements, make some policy announcements which are in favor of people at large. So I'm not sure there's going to be a great linkage on a long-term basis only on this, but I do think there will be some attempt in this budget to demonstrate a largesse of kind, and whether it's to come through universal income or it's to come through some other support or direct benefit, which I think is a very, very smart way to do things. Because we have the technology right now, we have the Aadhaar, we have digital, we have bank accounts, we have digital accounts, and we have digital identities, sorry. So I think the two or three things which are important is, despite our current handicaps, and you mentioned some of them, by the way, these are serious handicaps, we are still growing at an amazing pace. It is, however, important right now that the government in its own plan announces either a 5 or a 10-year infrastructure rollout plan, which talks of all of them, roads, ports, highways, waterways, the whole works, and also talks of what we're going to spend and what we're going to get for it. Because please remember, when you have large infrastructure projects ongoing, they consume lots of people, lots of material, they generate demand of steel, cement, and all kinds of other materials, and post their implementation, they actually smoothen the overall economy and thereby creating more value and therefore more jobs. So actually jobs get created through many, many different initiatives. It's not just one initiative, and which is why I mentioned at the beginning that it is important to demonstrate growth in enterprise, and not just new enterprise, but enterprises, projects, units, divisions, as they grow, they will create more jobs. And by the way, it is not the formal sector alone. I'm reiterating this fact. It is not the formal sector alone that will create jobs. All sectors, especially the informal, creates many, many more jobs. We do, however, need to do things to relieve and release the stress in the rural economy. That is important, because it's not just not enough jobs being created, it's causing actual distress. So there are things that we need to be done. We do need to figure out at the same time that we don't end up announcing something which becomes baggage for a new government, even if the same party comes in, because your fisc right now is at a point that you have to be careful. There is a need for us to use. We have an option. There's been a debate ongoing. Can the RBI funds be made available to the government? Retained earnings can. And so there are options available to us to tap resources and use those resources productively to create economic activity, which thereby creates jobs. And that is a positive way to do this. The debate on how we can address people who are below the poverty line, I think, has been on in India for many decades. And we in CII had actually argued for this some years ago. We had said, when you look at any new criteria for reservations, please look at economic criteria as an important criteria for anybody who's left behind. I'm actually glad that they announced this, but the only thing worrisome is that this number is going on climbing. We have a 60% reservation in jobs. And I don't know, Pradeep or somebody said government doesn't provide a lot of jobs. Government, by the way, is a very large employer. It is a massive employer in India. And
yeah. Right.
It's not a nice thing to say, but for many people, it's also a preferred job because they feel the safety of getting into that job. So it is a highly in-demand kind of job.
No, I think...
So we need to figure out a way to do this more efficiently. Go ahead.
No, I absolutely agree with you, or I couldn't disagree with any point that you make, but I think you alluded to the rural sector, and let me quickly go across to Naushad Forbes and then Pradeep Bhargav on this. And Dr. Forbes, I think one of the points about the rural sector is that NREGA is, of course, the big go-to as far as job creation for that sector is concerned, one of the biggest employers. On an average, NREGA generates 250 lakh persons day every year. Now, given the rural stress, is there more budget focus that's required there? And the other point that one would want to talk to you about is more than 50% of India's labor force is engaged in agri or allied jobs. With rural distress at its peak, how do we shift the extra labor force into other jobs? I mean, China did that with construction and infrastructure and all of that. We don't seem to be moving in a big way towards the other sectors of the economy which can pull people out of rural stress, rural agriculture and all of that.
Well, you know, very quickly on the first question, I'll spend more time on the second. On the first question, I think this government has actually taken a program that was launched by the previous government and actually expanded it and funded it even better. And they have actually used the NREGA program as a way of creating rural employment and in turn rural demand. It's been quite an effective program from the perspective of putting money in the hands of people. It's been of variable effectiveness in terms of the outcomes of actual rural infrastructure that's been created, which was meant also to be one of the outcomes of the program. On your second question, in terms of what should we be looking for in terms of employment creation? Where are the opportunities? There are two areas that we should be looking for employment creation. One, I think we can look at very tangibly. The second requires change in policy. The area that we can look at very tangibly is service sector employment. That's where we've been creating most of the employment opportunities in the country, and where perhaps the biggest single opportunity lies in the tourism sector. Tourism and hospitality are huge employers around the world. We are really only scratching the surface when it comes to growing our own tourism sector. We get 1/3 as many tourists each year as Singapore does or Thailand does. We get less than 1/10 as many tourists each year as France does. And actually we have an abundance of natural beauty, of history, of monuments, which other countries simply cannot match. So we have a huge potential in tourism that can create masses and masses not only of jobs, but that can create millions and millions of low-skilled jobs, precisely the kinds of jobs that we need to create in a massive way. It will require some of those investments in primary education that I mentioned earlier, but the opportunity is there for us to take up. I think we should focus our skilling programs very strongly on all the jobs, all the skills that underlie the tourism sector.
Right.
On the second area, which is much more problematic, is labor-intensive manufacturing, where when this government came in, it actually had a significant program on labor reform.
Right.
That's kind of vanished over the last few years. And only if we address labor reform in a serious way can we expect labor-intensive manufacturing to actually pick up, which is what put millions and millions of people, 50 million people, to work in China in labor-intensive manufacturing that was export-oriented.
Now, Dr. Forbes, hold that thought right now. I want to go across to Manish Sabharwal, and I've got very little time left on the show, and Manish, if you can make this brief. In a country like ours, and I think it's only fair that we talk about the jobs of the future, there is Industrial Revolution 4.0 upon us. Is it going to be realistic for India to create around the jobs that we need? 15 million people are entering the job market. How do we create jobs that are going to be relevant in the future, and the jobs that the future will need?
Oh, I would say Industry 4.0 is not relevant for India at this stage of our development. Machine learning, automation, robotics is very relevant for countries like America, which are at a per capita income of $50,000, because they are at the productivity frontier. India, with a per capita income of $1,500, has a lot of lower hanging fruit like regulatory cholesterol, human capital and infrastructure, which we can fix. What is the nightmare scenario of the US? 50% of their labor force will generate 13% of their GDP. We are already there. Hamara kya bigad loge yaar? India, half our labor force produces 13% of our GDP. So we are so far away from the productivity frontier that I think photocopying or echoing some of the concerns, which are very valid in a country which is trying to prevent people from falling into poverty, are not always applicable to a country like India, which is trying to pull people out of poverty. So I would submit that India is so far from the productivity frontier that from our journey from $1,500 to $8,000 to $10,000 per capita income is not really retarded, hurt or diminished by Industry 4.0. Now, will we ever get to America's $50,000 per capita income? I don't know. But I think right now let's focus on becoming a middle income country between $8,000 to $10,000. Which is not a problem like cancer or climate change. The binding constraint is not external to India. It is just regulatory cholesterol, human capital and in better infrastructure.
Okay, I think I've completely run out of time here. This is a fascinating discussion, and I wish we could have spread this over the next half an hour as well, and we could have done a 1 hour discussion. Foolish in hindsight to have restricted it to half an hour, but we've got a panel waiting on the fiscal populism versus the fiscal prudence debate, and that's coming up in just a bit. But thank you very much, Naushad Forbes, Mr. Bhargav, of course, Mr. Munjal, and Manish Sabharwal for joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate. The problem in India is not just about job creation, it is the kind of jobs that are being created, it is about gainful employment. The only way the budget can perhaps move the needle on jobs is if it eases some of the infrastructure bottlenecks, if it eases some of the rules and regulations so that industry can go out there and rekindle the animal spirits of Indian industry to create far more jobs than it is creating right now. With that, we end this edition of the India Development Debate. Do stay with us because we'll be back discussing India's fisc, the big elephant in the room, in just a bit.